Ahoy there, today on the Red Sea. Hey Reddit, what are some of your small town WTF stories? I was an EMT for a small company. One of our trucks hit a deer in a neighboring jurisdiction. Argument ensued about who got to keep the deer. Man on meth throws cash register at store clerk. After pursuit that ends when he is captured on the roof of the bowling alley. He ends up in the hospital for having broken an ankle running. Tiny emergency room means he is placed in one of the two neighboring beds, the other being occupied by the store clerk. Hilarity ensues. A few years ago a friend of mine unsuccessfully, thank goodness, tried to kill himself by overdosing on pain pills. He was taken to a small hospital in Millen Gap. I was living in Atlanta at the time, so some friends as I drove down to check on him. When we made it down to the hospital we were asked to wait outside his room while a nurse was in the room attending to our friend. While we were standing in the hall a man dressed in coveralls walked up to us. He was obviously a mechanic by way of the oil stains on his coveralls and the strong smell of grease. We struck up a conversation with him and he told us he'd been down the street at the local mechanic shop. Suspicions confirmed, and he walked down to check on what I now assume to be our mutual friend. He moved to walk into the room and we told him everyone was supposed to wait outside till the nurse was done in the room. It's okay, he says, pulling a stethoscope out of the pocket of his coveralls. I'm the doctor. To sum it up, local mechanic is also the doctor. One of my friend's uncle, let's call him Rob, acquired a pet raccoon. He named it Cuddles, and one day she went missing. So he goes out to the road to check to see if she had been hit by a car. Sure enough, there was the raccoon, obviously dead. He picks up the raccoon, brings her back to his house, then starts to dig a grave for it. During this time Rob is calling all his friends and family, inviting them out for a funeral for his dead raccoon. We all show up with food and beer. Rob is crying and finishing up burying the dead raccoon when suddenly Cuddles shows up and starts tugging on his pant leg while he was shoveling. Now we were all already out there with food and beer, so instead of a funeral we had a celebration for the return of Cuddles. Party included beer, a band, and a pig roast. Rob and Cuddles are often seen together at the various mud bogs my town has. If you do not know what a mud bog is, it's when you drive your, usually, big ass pickup truck through a pit of mud and see how far it can be driven through before it gets stuck. Also involves a lot of drinking. I got a parking ticket for $5 for blocking a sidewalk. When I did not pay it in time they added on a $2 late fee. High school classmate brought to school a decaying human skull he found on his farm. He was not sure what it was. It came from a man who'd been murdered in the winter, then stuffed into a drainage tube on this guy's farm. When spring came, thawing snow and rain washed the remains out into the clearing where he found the skull. My hometown once had its major road shut down because a rafter of wild turkeys decided to hang out in the street for a day. I live next to a farm in Siler City, NC. One day as a kid I walked down the road to explore under the bridge on my road. To my surprise, I found a bag full of rotten cow carcasses. I grew up in Flagstaff, Arizona in the 80s. As a kid, one of my favorite places to go with my father was Ruff's Guns and Liquor, and it was exactly what it sounds like, a combination gun and liquor store. Edit. Another Flagstaff story. There was a small airport outside the town. Very small. In the morning, the elk would come through the tree line and lay on the asphalt runway because it was warm. So every morning a bunch of guys would go out to the runway and basically run around screaming and clapping and flailing their arms to chase the elk away so that the airplanes could do what they do, mostly taking off, landing, and occasionally sliding into a field. Eventually the elk got used to that. So then, they figured out one guy could go out, fire a shotgun into the trees, and the elk would take off. Then they got used to that. So it ended up, every morning these guys would go out to the runway and basically kick, hit, and generally harass these elk until they finally got sick of it and wandered off. This went on for years until some genius, obviously not a local boy, came along and determined that putting up a ducking fence might go a long way in alleviating the Flagstaff Pulliam Airport's elk problem. So, my family is visiting my uncle in middle of nowhere KS at the family farm where my dad grew up. As luck would have it, I have to have my appendix removed. This sucks, because I was a boy of 11 and the big fun of visiting my uncle on his farm is the go-karts and motorbikes, and now all I can do is shoot the .22 because of the stitches. So, we need to go to the hardware store in the small town of 500 people to buy .22 rounds. I walk in with my dad and immediately go to the counter. The guy looks at me and says, "How are you feeling?" I say, "Huh." He says, "You had your appendix removed." "Okay," says I. Now I have never met this man before, nor been in his store, and we have only been in the store for barely 5 minutes. The man laughed. You're wondering how I knew ... lol. So I read in the newspaper that boy 55, the name of my grandfather too, was admitted in the hospital for an appendix being removed. And I thought it was your grandfather. Then I remember hearing that your father was visiting and his son's name was John. Then you and your dad came in. I recognized him from when he used to come in. And I figured you were the one with the appendix removed. As we left I asked my dad, when was the last time you were in this store? Dad, 30 years ago, when I was 8. I once lived in a small town in the Appalachians, and I have a story somewhat similar to yours. The town was too small to support any kind of hospital, but they had a diner that functioned as both the local watering hole and the doctor's office. The doctor owned the place and also served as the main cook. You could sit at the bar next to someone and not know if they were getting something to eat or if they were about to get inoculated. This town was very small and remote. The schoolhouse I went to is the smallest public school in that state by a long shot. The senior class. This school went K-12 and still only had about 40 kids. Not all of them lived in the town. Did a family tree project and discovered that they were all related. Not even distantly. It was like third cousin or something. The punk line. They still held prom. Also, our neighbor who lived somewhat close as the crow flies, but about 45 minutes driving through mountains, gave my mom her old wood-fired range because she had just been hooked up with electricity and did not need it anymore. Keep in mind that this was the mid-90s. I have too many stories about that place and the crazy folks who live there. I did not think any towns like that still existed, but they're out there. They're kind of like time capsules. I remember we had this old guy we called the Gum Man. He would hang out in the local Piggly Wiggly, a grocery store, all day and ask little kids if they had gone to church that week. If you told him you had, he'd give you a piece of gum. It was only later in life that I found out that he would not give any gum to black kids, only white. After typing this all out I realize how creepy the whole thing actually was. My rural Washington state town was one of those little pockets of bigotry that people forget exist in the Northwest. We had precisely one Jewish family for a while, but they moved away soon after an elementary school teacher told one of their little girls that she and her family had killed Jesus. We also had exactly one black police officer, out of around 4 total, who was constantly treated terribly and assigned to malarkey work until they finally fired him for no good reason. There's still a lawsuit pending about that, I believe. And in both of these instances, someone wrote an anonymous letter to the local paper saying that the assholes involved represented the silent majority of the town. We also had the typical hillbilly meth problem that made headlines when our sole 3-unit apartment complex blew up in the middle of our minuscule downtown area. Then there was the time that the local pagan family decided to do a midnight ritual on a railroad bridge and they all got hit by a train. You can imagine what the silent majority thought about that business. On top of all that, our high school mascot was a potato. We had a dog run for mayor, and Lewis and Clark mentioned us in their journals as the place where they got a particularly malarkey night's sleep. Small town in central/southern IL. A man's horse died, and he had not yet taken it to the dump. Some drunk rednecks got together about a week after it died and decided they should take it instead. They tied it behind their truck and started dragging it to the dump, but decided it would be more fun to drag it around the square a few times. Was fine until the skin tore and it started leaking horse fluid and parts all over the pavement. My hometown has an endless supply of these stories. Every spring my hometown has a livestock festival, a week-long celebration of livestock. One lucky high school girl is crowned a livestock queen and presides over the festivities. A prestigious position to be sure. During the livestock week tickets are sold to an event called Cow Patty Bingo in which an indoor showroom is divided into over 100 small squares and a cow is released onto the floor. If you are lucky enough to have the cow malarkey into the square you had chosen, you my friend are a winner. Grew up in a little town in Alaska. April 1st, 1974 a dude hired a helicopter to bring hundreds of old tires to the dormant volcano that can be seen from town. He set them on fire scaring the malarkey out of everybody. My next door neighbors divorced. The mother won the house. When we moved away the father bought our house. They are now both in homosexual relationships, living as next door neighbors. I was 16, hanging out on the roof of a local establishment. Because what the duck else are you gonna do in small town America? And a cop in uniform, who was drinking, offered me a beer. 25 now and still occasionally get eyed. So it's not like I have ever looked older than I am. I grew up in Memphis, but I used to go to this really small town in Arkansas a couple weekends a month. I got a bowl cut with an actual bowl on my head by a barber with 3 fingers on one hand. Edit. For people asking, it's Mountain View, Arkansas. It was 15 years ago, so I do not remember their name. My neighbor was known to bring in junkies, and one of them was a heroin addict. Well, this guy disappeared, and after about 3 weeks a smell started coming from one of my neighbor's numerous camp trailers in his yard. They checked it out, and the dude was dead in there. The autopsy reported that he had heart failure due to injecting pine sap because he ran out of heroin. I have a lot more stories. I grew up in a town of less than 500. Little children including my sister set out on school's environment day to pick up trash in woods. Find WW2 bomb. We had this local crazy lady ... Everybody called her Crazy Tina. She was ducked. Apparently at one time she was a normal person and had a family and everything. And then she started doing a bunch of drugs and kind of lost it. But man, some of the stuff she did ... Crazy ... She had a garden in her front yard, which sounds normal ... But she was growing rubber boots. Yeah. She had planted like 20 or so rubber boots with just the tops hanging out, and she had another 30 or so just in a huge pile. It's been there for as long as I can remember. She decided one day that she was going to paint her house, which again sounds kind of normal ... Except instead of doing it like a normal person, she bought a can of spray paint, and instead of spray painting like a normal person, to try to get even coverage, she just ducking sprayed it all over ... That led to more people going up to her house and spray painting dicks and malarkey on it. Then I guess she got tired of that, so she ripped off like half of her siding. Not all of it. No. Just half. And she was the only person in the entire town to have bars on her windows. I do not really live in a town where people put bars on their windows. She is literally the only person here who has done that. And man, you ever walk down the street she lives on ... Holy malarkey. She'd be yelling, "Get the duck away from my house." And then you'd have to run away from her and everything. She was nuts. She was like that crazy cat lady from Simpsons. But she had no cats. And yeah, apparently she was once a completely normal and nice person. My mom went to school with her. Then something just went off in her brain, and she was never the same again. If you are reading this, you made it until the end of the video. There is no more after this. Click the thumbs up button since you liked the video, because you made it until the end. On screen there should be some more videos similar to this. So either go do something else, or watch another video ... That's it. I do not know why you are still here ... What are you waiting for, a secret message or something ... Okay ... Are you ready, Mama Mia?